Panzer Ace.The Memoirs of an Iron Cross Panzer Commander from Barbarossa to Normandy, Richard Freiherr von Rosen. The Second World War begins. 1939. As late as July and August 1939, we were at Oberbarenberg in the Erzgebirge as usual. Nothing was different on this visit from the previous ones. We went on many rambles with Mother, including into the Sudetenland, which had been annexed in October 1938, for example to the convent church at Mariaschin and into the Bohemian mountains. I myself had got to Oberbarenberg by motorcycle and used it to make quite a few excursions, visiting Saxon Switzerland and Dresden. I read the newspapers very attentively and listened every day to the news bulletins. Just as in 1938, the increasingly tense foreign policy situation could be sensed everywhere. The atmosphere became ever more oppressive in the second half of August. Air raid sirens were tested and practice blackouts carried out, private vehicles requisitioned and reservists called up. All this pointed towards the impending conflict. We had entered the last 10 days of peace. The radio broadcast endless military music and unflinching new reports regarding atrocities by the Poles against Volksdeutsch, with news bulletins with ever more dangerous threats sandwiched in between. Many of the reported attacks had been staged by the Nazis, such as the incident at the Glewitz radio station on 31 August, but others actually did happen. Whom should one believe? A typical comment by adults was, "Without a miracle, war with Poland cannot be avoided," or "Once the harvest is in, it will start." On 23 August, we breathed a sigh of relief. Shortly before, the unexpected had come to pass. Behind the backs of the Western Allies, the archenemies Hitler and Stalin had concluded a non-aggression pact. There was a secret protocol, hardly any knowledge of which had been made public, in which the Baltic states had been conceded to the Soviets' sphere of influence. Would this enable the calamity to be avoided at the last moment? Everybody prayed for it. On the afternoon of 31 August, there was only one subject of discussion. The Reichstag had been summoned for the following day to hear a declaration by the Reich government. It was fairly clear what this meant. On Friday, 1 September, everybody sat by their radio sets, my family too. Finally came Hitler's voice with the sentence announcing the disaster. Since 5:45 we have been shooting back. Now it was official, we were at war. Depression reigned. What would we soon be having to face? The grown-ups remembered the awful war years of 1917 and 1918. The turnip and swede winter, the shortage of coal, military hospitals filled to overflowing, and so many families in mourning. Soon the radio announced the first measures: food ration cards, clothing coupons classified by age and gender, petrol rationing, travel restrictions, coal quotas, frantic activity. Everything had already been prepared. In the years that followed, we would have to have a blackout, have to hoard, have to evacuate. The only sources of information were the official Reich radio service, which broadcast reports prepared by the propaganda ministry, and the newspapers, controlled by the same body. Listening to foreign radio stations was not yet illegal, but for the most part their broadcasts in times of crisis did not provide the true circumstances affecting Germany. In any case, their customary exaggerations condemned them as a non-credible source. East Prussia had been separated geographically from the Reich since 1919, and the Reich's claim for an extraterritorial railway line and road across the Polish corridor to connect with it seemed to me reasonable. Also that Danzig, which had been placed under a League of Nations mandate by the Treaty of Versailles, should be returned to the Reich. I found the claims of Polish atrocities against the citizens of German stock in the Polish corridor and the province of Posen believable, while being dubious about the alleged Polish attack on the Gleiwitz radio station. To a certain extent, there was little sympathy for the Poles, but a future war against the Western powers was considered a great danger, and there was no possibility of avoiding it. Even amongst my own generation, there was little euphoria and enthusiasm for a war. But if the fatherland was in danger then, one had to make a stand and become involved. Whatever events had unleashed the war were irrelevant. Many believed secretly that it would be a short war ending with a quick victory. The very first special bulletins from Poland reinforced the hope that, once again, the Führer was right. Then 2 days later came the damper. It was Sunday, and Antonet had heard on the radio that France and Britain had declared war on Germany. A local war against Poland was developing into a kind of world war, for Great Britain brought into the war the British Empire, Australia and New Zealand, India, and a few days later the South African Union and Canada. This did not look good. I prepared for my return journey to Rastatt. Private journeys by car or motorcycle were forbidden, and so I had to go to the office of the district administrator at Dippeldiswalde for an exemption certificate. I also received a docket allowing me 5 liters of petrol, enough to get me home to Rastatt. After breakfast on 9 September I set out, and spent that night in the Panzer barracks at Bamberg, which I would enter 14 months later as a soldier. The next day I arrived at Rastatt. I became a dispatch rider for the military district, and had a red corner stamped onto my number plate, which showed my authority to use my motorcycle. Rastatt was in the so-called red zone, which was being evacuated. Women and children had already gone, and all schools and most businesses had shut down. The nearby Rhine front was very quiet, the French idle in their Maginot Line, the Germans behind their west wall. Only the big bridge at Wintersdorf had been demolished. Neither side wanted to fire on the other, and a friendly traffic existed across both sides of the Rhine. At least that was how it was on the Upper Rhine, the end nearest Switzerland. In those days they called it the Drôle de Guerre, the phony war. I made myself useful at home. The nightly blackout was strictly enforced. Slackness attracted a fine. Not just once did the neighborhood warden hammer on the door and shout, "Blackout." Not the slightest chink of light must be seen from outside. In peacetime, air raid and blackout practices had often been held, but these were not taken too seriously. One only bothered with the rooms being occupied at the time. But now it was part of everyday wartime life. Here was something I could do to keep myself busy. Wooden frames had to be made and covered with black paper to put over the windows in the evening. Makeshift solutions were no longer acceptable. Everything had to be done for the long term. In time the system was perfected. Black curtains for the bedrooms, while rooms with sliding shutters or blinds had only the air slits pasted over. These were checked from time to time. There was no longer any street lighting. The neighborhoods were black as pitch. In train compartments, only a dim blue light was permitted, while all road vehicles had to place a cap with a small slit over their headlights so that one could be seen by oncoming traffic. Even pocket lamps had to have a cover, projecting the light down onto one's feet. Pedestrians wore phosphorescent badges on their lapels to avoid colliding. An air raid shelter was set up in our cellar, which in May 1940 offered us protection from French artillery fire. From October 1939, I attended high school at Baden-Baden. There were just a few of us who met up each morning on Rastatt railway station. Mostly we did go to school, but occasionally preferred to climb the Batter, a 570m hill on the edge of the Black Forest, or spent the morning in the reading room at the Spa House. We were known to the people of Baden-Baden as the Westwall Gypsies, and it was rare that any of us was absent. Our schools were reopened on 7 January 1940, but closed again shortly afterwards. It was a bitterly cold winter, and no coke was available for heating purposes. At the beginning of February 1940, I submitted my application as a volunteer for the Army Officers Course, since that had always been my ambition. My papers were sent to the Panzer troops. At the end of that month, I was accepted as a volunteer, and shortly afterwards passed the medical as fit for war duty. At the beginning of July, I attended for psychological testing at Stuttgart for 2.5 days. This course was feared and the failure rate high, but I returned home with a feeling of confidence. Meanwhile, the 8th grade scholars, amongst whom I had been transferred at Easter, had been informed officially that every one of them called up for military service would be awarded the Abitur secondary school graduation certificate, if conduct and achievements in class justify it. Accordingly, from early summer 1940, most of my class had left, the majority to enlist voluntarily, some into the SS, after doing 3 months compulsory labor service, with the Reichsarbeitsdienst (RAD) state labor service. On the other hand, I was informed by the military district command that I could expect to be called up on 1 October. It seemed that my hopes were to be fulfilled. As an aspirant for an active officer's career, I was exempt from the RAD. The following series of events from the beginning of 1940 fundamentally influenced our outlook and morale. Richard Freiherr von Rosen, as an 18-year-old high school boy in October 1940. Formal order dated 27 February 1940 from the Military District Command at Rastatt to the author requiring him to report at once to the local police in connection with his registration for call-up. Letter dated 2 April 1940 from the Military District Command at Rastatt to the author's father, notifying him that his son's enlistment was expected to happen in the period up to 1 October 1940. Letter dated 27 May 1940 from the Ludwig Wilhelm High School, Rastatt, advising the author of the award of the Abitur, subject to conditions of conduct and achievements in class, for each 8th grade scholar called up for military service. Notification dated 24 July 1940 to the author from the Military District Command, Rastatt, confirming the registration of his candidacy for the Army Officers Course. Orders for your call-up to follow in due course. The author's first field postcard home to his family in Rastatt, October 1940. Members of the RAD at a crossroads near Rastatt/Baden, where the von Rosen family lived for many years. An early version of the Panzer IV, as seen on a postcard available for soldiers to buy. A Wehrmacht convoy passing through the town of Bamberg. Panzerschütze Richard Freiherr von Rosen, photographed in October 1940. The arm of service color for the Panzer uniform was pink piping along the edge of the collar, shoulder straps and collar patches. The triangle above the cockade on the field cap was also pink. The occupation of Scandinavia. 1940. The campaign in the West. 1940. My mood after the initial military successes was almost euphoric. To have preempted the British in Norway was a master stroke. The Battle of Narvik was extremely dramatic. General Dietel defended the town for 4 weeks in the mountains between Narvik and the Swedish border, with his force of Bavarian and Austrian mountain troops. He became a national hero. The British retreat from Norway at the end of May 1940 was seen as a clear indication of the superiority of the Wehrmacht over them, at least in the air and on land. The unleashing of the campaign in the West simultaneously with the operation in Norway was completely unexpected, and thus came as a surprise to the German people. The violation of Belgian and Dutch neutrality was accepted as a necessity. The German successes in the West were at first almost unbelievable. Every day my father and I would advance colored pins on a map to show the new front line as reported by frequent special reports and the Wehrmacht bulletins. Our radio was left on all day so as not to miss anything. At that time, at the time of our national success, the Wehrmacht bulletins were always very credible and unvarnished. It filled us with great satisfaction that the armistice was signed at the same place, Compiègne, in the same railway carriage, and with the same ceremony as for the German capitulation in 1918. The previous shame was atoned for. Now we could be very accommodating and generous in the armistice negotiations. Or in any case, it seemed that this should be so. Over the next few days, German convoys coming from France rolled endlessly from dawn until dusk to their peacetime garrisons at Rastatt. They included the Rastatt Infantry Regiment 111 and Artillery AT 35. Great enthusiasm and relief. Crowds waving and flowers, everything as it should be to welcome home a conquering army. And there was I still in school. I bought a map of England, for now we were all sure that England was next. As we know now, we were mistaken. Now my hour had come. On 18 October 1940, I received my call-up to PANZER ACE.The 35 at Bamberg. My wish to serve with the Panzers as an officer aspirant was to be fulfilled. The letter was waiting for me when I got home from school at midday. My mother opened the door and led me rather ceremoniously to the dining table, which lay prepared. She told me later how much she was impressed by the happiness shining in my face as I read the content of the letter. In accordance to my plan, I was now a soldier. No longer a dream but reality. After lunch, I cycled into town in order to tell as many of my classmates or acquaintances as possible of my good fortune. But once you're trained, the war will be long over, I thought to myself. Maybe I might be a soldier of the occupation in France. If I had only suspected what was yet to come in the war, and how many years yet it would last. My father feared as much. The victories in Poland and France did nothing to lessen his foreboding that none of our enemies would ever conclude a peace treaty with Hitler. At that time, it did not worry me what he said. I went to school next day, took my leave of my professors and classmates, and reported my departure to the director. Thus ended my schooling longed for, but still very odd. I had 5 days left before my parents escorted me to the railway station and waved me off to Bamberg garrison. With an excited feeling in my stomach, I reported to the officer of the watch at the Panzer barracks. No 3 Company was expecting us, 41 18-year-old boys for training with PZ RGTS 35 and 36. 8 to a room, we stretched out and sized each other up. What kind of hotshots they were, with the girls at sport or drinking beer. For me, apart from sport, this was virgin territory. All the same, I accompanied them to the canteen and drank my first beer. It tasted ghastly, but it was what men did. Next day the life began in earnest. We were always on the go from 6 in the morning until curfew at 10, exercises and more exercises. A horde of instructors were let loose on us. Officer candidates. Well, we'll see about that. I spent more time on the ground than standing up. For a change there was tuition, some weapons training, into how many parts can you dismantle a rifle. Cleaning the barrack room, uniform or locker inspections, always followed by the checkup inspection. Yet all this crap even gave us pleasure. We are hard men, they will never force us under. And the first song we learned was, Es ist so schön Soldat zu sein, Anna-Marie. It's so wonderful to be a soldier, Anna-Marie. After 14 days at Bamberg, we were transferred. I went with 20 of my co-recruits to our field unit, PZ RGT 35 at Auxerre on the Yonne in France, where we were assigned to an officer aspirant's course. Our instructor was Oberleutnant Schulz, after the war a military attaché to the Bundestag. When he was around, Our instructors suddenly became human. Otherwise, we had nothing to laugh about. Two Obergeoffrey auxiliary instructors were extremely sadistic. This period was hellish because we were entirely at their mercy. Nobody dared complain because we were expected to be able to stand it. These primitive beings especially had it in for me because I was a Vaughn. After curfew one evening, they roused us from bed in our pajamas and made us crawl across the muddy village street where a herd of sheep had been in the afternoon. I lost my self-control. It was all because one of my colleagues had a drop of coffee in his field flask at room inspection. When the light was put out and we lay on our straw sacks in our filthy pajamas, I drew the blanket over my head and howled in anger. I had never before imagined that men could be so foul. But my defiance also grew. Don't let it get you down, they must not have their victory. We were introduced individually to the regimental commander, Oberst Eberbach. He was very human, hearty and interested. I noticed by his questions and the manner of his leave-taking that he was well disposed to me. I was appeased. At the beginning of December 1940, the regiment moved to the Rhineland. Our course was now held in the large hall of the Windherval Inn at Solingen-Hirschade. The proprietress, Aunt Ella, was a determined personality who made sure that the instructors did not treat us too badly in our off-duty hours. From 13 December 1940, I was laid up in the military hospital at Wuppertal-Elberfeld with an infected foot, over Christmas and New Year too. When I returned to the course on 26 January 1941, panzer driving training had begun. That was a good time. We arranged it so that we always drove past the girls' high school with our Panzer I training tank during their long lunch break and did a lap of honor around the courtyard. We laid it on pretty thick, but unfortunately we never had leave and so there was no opportunity to return the sympathy shown us. Our course ended on 6 February 1941. Another transfer was in the offing for the regiment, but before that we officer aspirants were now classified as Fahnenjunker officer cadets, senior grade, and spread over the 8 companies of PZ RGT 35. I went to one company with Exolf, soon to fall in Russia. The company commander was Oberleutnant von Kassel. We were lodged in billets in the village of Patschade near Opladen. Solf and I were taken into the house of Father Zimmermann, the local Catholic priest. We had a superb suite with bathroom and proper beds. Long afterwards I kept in touch with him by letter. In mid-February 1941, the regiment was transferred to the Cognac region of southern France. Our one company was in the small village of Marignac and received new recruits. Some of them were lodged in the village school. I was the room senior. A large room, 13 beds with straw sacks, no locker, a water tap in the schoolyard. It was difficult to keep oneself clean. The commander and part of the company staff occupied a small shadow about a kilometer outside the village on a ridge affording a panorama over the countryside. Vineyards all around. We Fahnenjunker had to eat every midday in the company officers' mess. Really, it was very pleasant to be with men who knew how to eat with a knife and fork and conversed in a cultured manner, and to be served by orderlies. For us this meant a shorter midday break involving washing, changing into uniform, a long run to the shade now, and after dining a long run back to change in order to present oneself promptly for the afternoon session. Woe betide us if we arrived late, naturally, the gentlemen officer aspirants. Once a week it was gentlemen's evening at the shade now. The food was better, served with fine Bordeaux wines. A fire burnt in the hearth and we relaxed in soft leather armchairs. Oberleutnant von Kassel was pleasant, communicative, interested, and humorous. I was in his good books. The training schedule was now primarily Panzer training with hardly any more disciplined training, and we had a lot of fun. Additionally, I was no longer a recruit. I stood guard and also had duties as an auxiliary instructor. Recently, a new recruit at Bamberg, von Rosen, and a group of other officer aspirants were transferred to Auxerre in France, where PANZER-ACE.35 had been stationed since the beginning of November 1940. The Schadau at Sennen near Joigny/Jan served as their quarters. The author's rooms are marked with an X. Recruit training was very demanding and lasted until 7 December 1940. On 13 December 1940, the author was admitted to the military hospital at Wuppertal-Elberfeld with an infected foot. With him in the picture are a fellow patient and two nurses. A game of chess with sisters at the military hospital. He was discharged on 6 February 1941. The driving instructor explains the instrument panel and operation of the light Panzer. Panzer driving training at the end of January 1941 in Solingen. The training vehicle was a Panzer I chassis without the superstructure and turret. The author, X, far left, with the group of corporals of the senior cadet grade in January and February 1941 at Solingen. The author wearing the long Wehrmacht overcoat, warm enough for normal winters. The clergy house of the parish priest Father Zimmermann at Patschade/Opladen, which served as the author's quarters, shared with a colleague. At the end of the senior cadet training course, he was transferred to 1 Company/PZ RGT-35. Back on a train, mid-February 1941, this time to southern France. Sentries patrolled along the train at every halt. X marks the author at top left of the open door. The cattle truck floors were only covered with straw, and the journey was anything but comfortable. Here hot refreshment is provided from a thermos. The officers of 1 Company/PZ RGT-35 were lodged at Schadau-Geibau. The Schadau was surrounded by vineyards from which cognac was produced. The spring of 1941 was pleasantly warm, and one could sit outside comfortably in the Schadau gardens. The senior cadets had quarters in Marignac/Gierne, a farming village. On Sundays, after dining in the officers' mess, the senior cadets were also permitted to use the comfortable armchairs in the gardens of the Schadau. Lieutenant Koenig listening to gramophone records and enjoying the sunshine of southern France. He fell in July 1941 at the Stary-Beichau Bridge. PZ RGT-35 returned to the Reich in April 1941. This photo was taken shortly before loading up at Cognac. The author, far left, with fellow members of the Guard detachment. Railway transport for Wehrmacht soldiers was often of the most primitive kind. The wagons were not fitted with toilets, resulting in this dangerous maneuver. In mid-March 1941, we were transferred to the Burgenland in Austria shortly after the Balkan campaign began. This came as a great surprise to all of us. The offensive resulted from the need to protect our Italian allies against the threat of defeat in Greece, their invasion not having been agreed beforehand with Hitler, and to prevent the British gaining a foothold there. Everything was settled so quickly, however, that we were not called for. At that time, I was promoted to Fahnenjunker Geoffrey, officer cadet senior grade, private soldier. Now I was a proper soldier. We spent a whole Saturday in Vienna, glorious. But it could not be repeated. Once again we were transported away by train, cattle wagons, straw, soot, and filth. The train rattled through the protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Where was this train going? On 25 April 1941, my company arrived at the Wartheliger, a large military training depot near Posen in the former Warthegau, now in Poland. It was a beautiful time of year, a glorious spring. On Saturdays and Sundays, a company lorry drove into Posen. I always went if I was off duty. There I would meet my godfather, Willie Seidlitz, for a good meal. Every Saturday evening I went to the theater or the opera, then caught the lorry for the 20 km back to the camp. I also called on the Scheinflugs, my friends from Oberbarenberg. Being from the Baltic states, the father had meanwhile landed up in Posen. I and my two friends played with model trains. As I was leaving, Frau Scheinflug said to me, "Your poor mother." I believe that both her sons became soldiers. The war went on long enough for them to qualify. In the regiment, rumors were rife as to how things would turn out next. Either the USSR would allow us free passage into Persia or Iraq, from where we would break through to the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, and Egypt. The Russians had placed a railway line and a highway at our disposal. Or we were to relieve Rommel. Nobody thought of an attack on the USSR. The Balkan Campaign, 1939, 1940, 1941. By 1 May 1941, all elements of 4 PZ Div, of which our PZ RGT-35 was part, had assembled in the Wartheliger. A lively series of exercises began. Almost daily we drove short or long distances, great importance being placed on crossing swamps. It often happened that the entire company would bog down in swampy land and have to be pulled free by the heavy tractors of the workshop company. Great emphasis was also placed on anti-gas training. They kept telling us that we could almost count on gas attacks by our next opponents. My Panzer was laid up for a longish period in the workshop. I spent half a day helping out there and learned a lot. After about 5 weeks, the company had an inspection and emerged faultless. It had carried out all work asked of it, except for our Panzer, which bogged down in a swamp. The regimental commander, Colonel Eberbach, shit on the driver from a great height for this. Besides Panzer training, we had many uniform parades, masked balls, etc., arranged by our Spies, Hauptfeldwebel Klepzig. In this manner, the 7 weeks at the troop training depot passed by quickly. Now and again, there was some talk of an operation against Russia. In the final week of our training at Wartheliger, PZ RGT-35 received 50 new Panzer IIIs, of which 8 came to our one company. The company was now equipped with 17 Panzer IIIs. 11 had a 5 cm gun and 6 a 3/7 cm gun. The 2 Panzer IIs each had a 2 cm gun. I had been in the rank of Geoffrey since March 1941 and became the gunner in a Panzer III with a 5 cm 38L42 main gun and 2 coaxial 7.92 MG 34s. The 22-ton Panzer III SDKFZ 141 had 5 crew: commander, driver, radio operator, gunner, and loader. We carried loose with us 1 submachine gun, 5 Luger pistols, and a quantity of egg grenades and stick grenades. The firepower of a single Panzer was therefore impressive, besides which it was well armored and fairly fast. Oberleutnant von Kassel, our company commander, was 24 years of age, and for me embodied the ideal type of officer. We would all go through fire for him. He came originally from the cavalry, and influenced me with his very human manner of company leadership and dealings with the men. His bravery and calmness, even in critical situations, impressed me again and again. In every respect, he was the model officer for me. The final days brought us a lot of work. The new weapons had to be zeroed in and calibrated, the gyro compass installed, the Panzer loaded up. It was extraordinary how much gear and equipment had to be put into a tank, and with proper handling it all fitted in. I sent my valuables home. The orders to roll could arrive at any time. After the Polish campaign, the administrative district of Reichgau-Wartheland was created, its capital being Posen in the west. Warthaliger was the training depot for 4 PZ Div, of which PZ RGT-35 formed part. A photo taken in March 1941 showing the author and the family with whom he was billeted in the Burgenland, Austria, not far from the border with Hungary. Oberleutnant Hans Detloff von Kassel, commander of 1 Company /PZ RGT-35. In 1941, this regiment was the armored fist of the main Frankish 4 PZ Div, whose headquarters had been established at Wuisburg in 1938. Unteroffizier Probster on a rocking horse. Towing hawsers are fitted to this Panzer III. The 4 PZ Div's insignia is on the glacis plate near the driver's viewing slit, but is very difficult to make out. Group photo on a Panzer III in Mars, Burgenland. The author on the far left with comrades Eckhard Solf and Fritz Fischer. Burgenland/Austria, April 1941. The Panzer III numbered 114 in the foreground has the short 5 cm gun. The author served as gunner aboard various panzers. The white bear near the turret number was the insignia for 1 company. The other companies of I. Abt, Major von Lauchert, each had a bear but in different colors. Loading up. Equipment and personal belongings had to be stowed in the panzer. In the background, tankers wait to refuel. The panzers of PZ RGT-35 were given a send-off from Wiener Neustadt with bouquets of flowers. Looking to the future, spare sections of track are seen on the bow in front of the panzer. The author visited Schloss Schönbrunn in Vienna on a Sunday excursion, end of April 1941. The lake at Schloss Schönbrunn. Soldiers who had a camera took pictures, which were then copied for their colleagues. Many copies of these photos have survived to this day. Going towards the eastern border. The photo shows panzers of PZ RGT-35 crossing a pioneer bridge over the River Warth in the Warthaliger troop training grounds. This giant complex was set up in 1904. Warthaliger 1941. Panzer and pioneer units of PZ RGT-35 practice crossing the Warth River in preparation for the campaign against Russia. 1 Company Panzer 114, camouflaged with birch branches. It is not known why the white bear insignia was painted both ahead of and behind the turret number. Traveling cross-country, Panzer 114 has become bogged down in swampy ground and is being dug free. At the right, driver Unteroffizier Braun looks away. The first objective of the attack at Cobrin has been reached without the company having had to fire a shot. Here the company is being refueled in the Russian fuel dump at Cobrin. Having been topped up at Cobrin, the panzers await new operational orders. The author marked X, meanwhile enjoys the summer sunshine. Refueling in the Russian fuel dump at Cobrin. In the foreground is Eckhard Solf.